The gunshot that tore through the peaceful New Mexico afternoon in the summer of 1872 wasn't meant to kill, but it changed Grace Winter's life forever. Before the bullet struck her, she'd been a woman with prospects, but afterward, she became the woman no one believed could ever be a proper wife again. They called her Too Broken. Mary Grace's hands trembled as she gazed out the dusty window of her brother's homestead. 3 years had passed since the stagecoach robbery that left a bullet lodged dangerously close to her spine, paralyzing her left leg and condemning her to a life dependent on a wooden crutch and, on her worst days, a wheelchair her brother Thomas had fashioned from an old dining chair and wagon wheels. "Gracie," Thomas called from the doorway, "the Hendersons are coming for supper. Mrs. Henderson's bringing her niece from back east." Grace sighed, knowing exactly what this meant. Thomas and his wife Abigail had been trying to match her with every eligible bachelor within 50 miles of Silver Creek for months. None had looked past her disability, their eyes always falling to her crutch before making excuses about needing to check their horses or fetching more drinks, anything to escape further conversation. "I can help Abigail with the cooking," Grace offered, reaching for her crutch. Thomas shook his head. "Abigail wants you to rest. She's worried you've been pushing yourself too hard with those embroidery orders." Grace bit back a retort. The embroidery work was the only thing that made her feel useful, the only contribution she could make to their household besides the occasional cooking when her leg permitted her to stand for more than a few minutes. "Did you hear?" Thomas continued, stepping into the room. "The Rocking G Ranch has a new owner, a fellow named Gabriel Reed. Bought it from Old Man Jenkins last month." "I hadn't heard," Grace replied, not particularly interested. Another rancher meant nothing to her secluded life. "Well, he'll be at supper too. Henderson says he's looking to expand his herd and might be interested in some of our land for grazing." Grace's stomach tightened. Another man to look at her with pity or, worse, to ignore her entirely. "I think I might be too tired for company tonight, Thomas." Her brother's expression softened. "Please, Gracie. It would mean a lot to Abigail. She worked hard on this dinner." Unable to disappoint her kind-hearted sister-in-law, Grace nodded reluctantly. "I'll be there." Hours later, dressed in her best blue calico dress with her dark blonde hair pinned neatly atop her head, Grace sat in the corner of their modest parlor as the guests arrived. The Hendersons entered first, portly Mr. Henderson, his bird-like wife, and their prim niece whose name Grace immediately forgot. They greeted her politely but quickly moved on, as most people did. Then the door opened one final time, and Gabriel Reed stepped into the room. Grace had expected another weathered rancher like most in Silver Creek sun, leathered skin, calloused hands, and practical clothing. But Gabriel Reed defied expectations. Tall and broad-shouldered, he appeared to be in his early 30s with chestnut hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was tanned but not weather-beaten, with a strong jaw softened by expressive hazel eyes. Unlike most visitors, when Thomas introduced him to Grace, Gabriel didn't just nod and move on. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, extended his hand, and looked directly into her eyes. "Miss Winters, it's a pleasure to meet you," he said, his voice carrying a slight Eastern accent that suggested education. Surprised by his directness, Grace hesitantly offered her hand. "Mr. Reed, welcome to Silver Creek." "Thank you." He smiled, and Grace noticed the crinkles forming at the corners of his eyes. "Your brother tells me you're quite talented with embroidery. I admit I know little about such things, but I'd be interested to see your work sometime." Before Grace could respond, Abigail announced dinner was ready. To Grace's further surprise, Gabriel asked, "May I escort you to the table, Miss Winters?" Self-consciousness flooded Grace's cheeks with heat. I move rather slowly, Mr. Reed." "You needn't wait for me. I'm in no hurry," he replied simply, offering his arm. For a moment, Grace hesitated, then placed her hand on his arm while gripping her crutch with the other. They moved toward the dining room at her pace, Gabriel adjusting his stride to match hers without comment or apparent impatience. Throughout dinner, Grace noticed Gabriel's gaze returning to her frequently, even as he discussed cattle prices with Thomas and land boundaries with Mr. Henderson. Unlike other men, he addressed questions directly to her, asking about her life in Silver Creek and seeming genuinely interested in her responses. As the evening progressed, Grace found herself speaking more than she had at any gathering in years. Gabriel listened attentively, responding thoughtfully to her observations about the changing seasons and the challenges of the territory's recent growth. When the Hendersons' niece attempted to capture Gabriel's attention with stories of Boston society, he listened politely but inevitably steered the conversation back to include Grace. After dessert, while the others gathered around the piano as Abigail played, Gabriel approached Grace's chair. "Would you mind showing me some of your embroidery work?" he asked. "Your brother mentioned you recently completed a piece for the church altar." Grace studied his face for signs of feigned interest but found none. "If you're truly interested," she said cautiously. "I am." She directed him to a sideboard where her most recent creation lay, an intricate scene of mountain wildflowers and a soaring eagle that had taken her weeks to complete. Gabriel examined it closely. "This is remarkable craftsmanship, Miss Winters. The detail in the eagle's feathers. I've never seen anything like it." "Thank you," Grace replied, unused to such specific praise. "It helps to have something to occupy my hands and mind." Gabriel turned to face her. "Your talent deserves wider recognition. Have you considered selling your work beyond Silver Creek?" Grace laughed softly. "Who would buy embroidery from an unknown woman in the New Mexico territory? Anyone with an appreciation for beauty and skill," Gabriel answered without hesitation. "I've seen similar work in shops in Denver and Santa Fe selling for considerable sums." Before Grace could respond, Thomas joined them. "Reed, Henderson's ready to discuss that grazing proposal if you're interested." Gabriel nodded. "Of course." Turning back to Grace, he said, "Thank you for sharing your work with me, Miss Winters. I hope we'll have the opportunity to continue our conversation soon." As he walked away, Grace felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a flutter of interest, a whisper of possibility. She quickly suppressed it. Men like Gabriel Reed didn't court women like her. Tonight's attention was mere politeness from a newcomer who didn't yet understand her situation. By next week, he would be like all the others, avoiding her gaze, speaking to her brother about her as if she weren't present, treating her as an object of pity rather than a woman. Grace had learned to accept her lot. One pleasant evening wouldn't change the reality of her broken body or the life it had condemned her to live. Yet, as she watched Gabriel's animated discussion with the men across the room, she couldn't help but wonder what it might be like to be seen, truly seen, by a man like him. 3 days later, Grace sat on the porch, taking advantage of the afternoon shade to work on a new embroidery piece. Thomas and Abigail had gone to town for supplies, leaving her alone with her thoughts and her needle. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled her attention from her work. Shading her eyes against the sun, she was surprised to see Gabriel Reed riding toward the house, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. Grace quickly tucked loose strands of hair behind her ears, suddenly conscious of her plain work dress and the smudge of dirt she'd acquired while picking herbs from Abigail's garden that morning. Gabriel dismounted smoothly, tying his horse, a magnificent chestnut, gelding to the hitching post before approaching the porch. "Good afternoon, Miss Winters," he called, removing his hat. "I hope I'm not intruding." Grace set aside her embroidery. "Not at all, Mr. Reed, though I'm afraid my brother and his wife are in town." "Actually," Gabriel said, climbing the porch steps, "I came to see you." He held up a package wrapped in brown paper. I brought something I thought might interest you. Curiosity overcame Grace's usual reserve. Please sit, she offered, gesturing to the chair beside her. Gabriel settled into the chair and handed her the package. I remembered our conversation about your embroidery. Grace carefully unwrapped the package to reveal several skeins of silk thread in rich, jewel-toned colors she'd never seen before. These are from a mercantile in Santa Fe, Gabriel explained. I had them sent over on yesterday's stage. The owner assured me they're the finest quality available in the territory. Grace ran her fingers over the silken threads, momentarily speechless. Such materials were far beyond what was available in Silver Creek's modest general store. Mr. Reed, this is incredibly thoughtful, but I can't accept such an expensive gift. It's not charity, Miss Winters, Gabriel said, seeming to anticipate her concern. Consider it an investment. I've been thinking about your work, and I believe there's a market for it. I have connections in Denver who own a shop catering to wealthy mining families. They're always seeking quality items to distinguish their establishment. Grace looked up from the threads. You can't be serious. I'm entirely serious, Gabriel replied. Your work is exceptional. If you're willing, I'd like to take some pieces to Denver on my next trip and show them to the shop owners. Why would you do this for me? Grace asked, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. No one had shown such interest in her abilities since before the accident. Gabriel's expression grew thoughtful. When I first arrived in Silver Creek, everyone was eager to tell me about everyone else who owned what land, who was feuding with whom, whose daughter was eligible for marriage. He paused. Several people mentioned you, but only as poor Miss Winters with the bad leg. Not one person mentioned your talent. He gestured to the embroidery in her lap. When I saw your work, I realized how short-sighted people can be, seeing only limitations, never possibilities. I've spent my life proving people wrong about what I could accomplish. Perhaps I recognized a kindred spirit. Grace studied his face, searching for signs of pity or false charm, finding neither. What limitations have you overcome, Mr. Reed? You seem to have been blessed with every advantage. Gabriel's laugh held no humor. Appearances can be deceiving, Miss Winters. I was born the bastard son of a housemaid on a Virginia plantation. My father was the plantation owner's son, who wanted nothing to do with me. I've worked since I was 6 years old to prove I deserved a place in this world. Grace hadn't expected such candor. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have presumed. No apology necessary, Gabriel said, his smile returning. We all make judgments based on what we see. I'm just suggesting that sometimes we need to look deeper at others and at ourselves. They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Gabriel spoke again. So, will you consider my proposal? About your embroidery? Grace ran her fingers over the silken threads again. I will consider it, Mr. Reed, and thank you for the threads. They're beautiful. Excellent. Gabriel stood, placing his hat back on his head. Perhaps you could show me more of your work when it's convenient. I'd like to select a few pieces to take to Denver next month. As he prepared to leave, Grace found herself reluctant to see him go. Mr. Reed, she called as he reached his horse. Would you care to stay for coffee? Abigail always leaves a pot warming on the stove. Gabriel's smile brightened his entire face. I'd like that very much, Miss Winters. As Grace led him into the house, moving carefully with her crutch, she felt a strange lightness in her chest, something she recognized, after a moment's reflection, as hope. Over the following weeks, Gabriel became a regular visitor at the Winters homestead. He brought books from his personal library when Grace mentioned her love of reading, and they spent hours discussing stories and ideas. He asked about her life before the accident, listening intently as she described growing up as the daughter of a storekeeper in Missouri and her family's journey west after her parents died. Grace found herself looking forward to his visits, preparing clever observations about books they'd both read or saving interesting news to share. With Gabriel, she felt herself becoming the woman she'd been before, engaging, thoughtful, alive with curiosity about the world. Thomas observed these visits with guarded optimism, while Abigail was more openly enthusiastic, ensuring fresh-baked goods were always available when Gabriel called and finding excuses to leave them alone. "He's quite taken with you," Abigail whispered one evening as they prepared supper, Gabriel and Thomas deep in conversation on the porch. "He's being kind," Grace corrected her, "and perhaps a bit lonely." Silver Creek isn't exactly overflowing with educated conversation. Abigail gave her a knowing look. "That man doesn't ride 10 miles just for conversation, Grace. Not 3 times a week." Grace shook her head, unwilling to nurture false hopes. "Even if he did feel something, what could come of it? I can barely walk across a room without assistance. I couldn't be a proper wife to any man, especially not one with a ranch to run." "Perhaps you should let him decide what he needs in a wife," Abigail suggested gently. True to his word, Gabriel arranged for several pieces of Grace's embroidery to be displayed in a Denver shop. When the first sales report arrived, Grace could scarcely believe the prices her work commanded. For the first time since the accident, she had income of her own money, not given out of familial obligation or pity. "We should celebrate," Gabriel declared when she showed him the letter. "Have dinner with me in town tomorrow night." Grace hesitated. "I don't often go to town." The stares, the whispers, the challenges of navigating uneven boardwalks and crowded spaces, she avoided them when possible. "The new hotel dining room is quite nice," Gabriel persisted. "And private. Please say yes, Grace." She couldn't deny the pleasure of hearing him say her given name, which he'd begun using only recently. "All right," she agreed. "But you must promise not to fuss if I need to leave early." "I promise," Gabriel said solemnly, though his eyes danced with delight at her acceptance. The following evening, dressed in her best gown, a deep blue silk, Abigail had insisted on ordering from a catalog last Christmas. Grace waited nervously for Gabriel's arrival. Thomas helped her into Gabriel's wagon, which he'd outfitted with extra cushions for her comfort. The journey to town was filled with Gabriel's stories about his cattle and the characters he'd encountered in Silver Creek. Grace found herself laughing more than she had in years, almost forgetting her apprehension about appearing in public. The hotel dining room was indeed elegant by Silver Creek standards, with crisp white tablecloths and a small vase of wildflowers on each table. The manager greeted Gabriel warmly and led them to a corner table partially screened by potted palms. "Mr. Reed specifically requested our most private table," the manager explained with a meaningful glance between them. Grace flushed, realizing what this might look like to others, a courtship dinner rather than a business celebration. Yet Gabriel seemed untroubled by the implication, ordering wine and recommending the roast beef with the confidence of a man accustomed to fine dining. As they ate, Grace noticed several townspeople glancing their way, whispering behind menus and napkins. Gabriel either didn't notice or chose to ignore them, keeping the conversation focused on Grace's embroidery success and his plans to expand his ranch. "I've purchased the old Miller property," he mentioned casually as they finished their meal. "It borders your brother's land to the west." "That's wonderful," Grace replied. "Thomas always said that land had the best water access in the county." Gabriel nodded. "That's what attracted me. I'm building a new house there, something more substantial than the cabin Jenkins left behind." "How lovely," Grace said, trying to imagine what sort of home a man like Gabriel might build. Something grand, she suspected, to match his ambitions. "I'd value your opinion on the plans," Gabriel continued. "The architect sent drawings from Santa Fe last week." Grace was startled by the request. My opinion? On your house. You have excellent taste, Gabriel said as if it were obvious. And a practical mind. I'd appreciate your insights. Before Grace could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A group of cowboys had entered, already half-drunk and boisterous. Grace recognized them as hands from the Bar T Ranch, notorious troublemakers. The manager hurried to quiet them, but one spotted Gabriel and lurched toward their table. Well, if it ain't the fancy Easterner, the cowboy drawled, reeking of whiskey. Heard you been buying up all the good land hereabouts. Gabriel's expression remained pleasant, though Grace noticed his posture stiffen. Good evening, Peterson. Enjoying your Saturday night, I see. Peterson's bleary gaze shifted to Grace, and his face twisted into a cruel smile. And you got yourself the crippled Winters girl. I mean to be charitable, Reed, or you just figure a broken woman won't give you no trouble. Gabriel's hand tightened on his fork, but before he could respond, another cowboy joined Peterson. Ah, he probably just wants someone to keep his bed warm who can't run away, the second man sniggered. In one fluid motion, Gabriel stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The dining room fell silent. Apologize to the lady, Gabriel said, his voice deadly quiet. Peterson sneered. I ain't apologizing to no. Gabriel's fist connected with Peterson's jaw before he could finish the sentence, sending the drunken cowboy sprawling across an empty table. The second cowboy lunged at Gabriel, but found himself similarly dispatched with a swift, efficient punch. The manager and two waiters rushed forward, restraining the cowboys and dragging them toward the door. Gabriel remained standing, his chest rising and falling rapidly, until they were removed from the dining room. Only then did he turn to Grace, his expression softening with concern. I'm so sorry about that, he said, retaking his seat. Are you all right? Grace stared at him, stunned by the speed and decisiveness of his actions. No one had defended her honor so forcefully since the accident. Most people acted as if she no longer possessed honor worth defending. I'm fine, she managed, though her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. But your hand, you're bleeding. Gabriel glanced at his scraped knuckles with disinterest. It's nothing, the manager returned, profusely apologetic. Mr. Reed, Miss Winters, please accept the hotel's deepest regrets. Your dinner is, of course, complimentary, and I've instructed the kitchen to prepare dessert immediately. That's very kind, Gabriel said. But I think Miss Winters might prefer to leave now. Grace surprised herself by saying, Actually, I would very much like to stay for dessert. Gabriel's eyebrows rose slightly, but he smiled. Then we'll stay. After the manager left, Grace leaned forward. You didn't need to hit those men. I absolutely did, Gabriel countered firmly. No man speaks about a lady that way in my presence, especially not about you. Why especially not me? Grace asked, her heart quickening. Gabriel reached across the table and, after a moment's hesitation, covered her hand with his. Because you matter to me, Grace, more than I expected, more than might be wise, given how little time we've known each other. Grace stared at their joined hands, his tanned and strong against her pale, slender fingers. People will talk, you know. They'll say what those cowboys said, that you're being charitable or taking advantage or settling for damaged goods because you can't do better. Gabriel's fingers tightened around hers. Let them talk. I've never cared for others' opinions of my choices, and I don't intend to start now. What exactly are you choosing, Gabriel? Grace asked, finally meeting his gaze. The pleasure of your company, for as long as you'll grant it, he answered. And the hope that, in time, you might consider granting it permanently. Grace's breath caught. You can't mean, I mean precisely what you think I mean, Gabriel said. his eyes never leaving hers. "But I'm not asking for an answer tonight. Only that you'll think about the possibility of us." "There are practical considerations," Grace protested weakly. "My condition will be accommodated," Gabriel finished for her, "in any and every way necessary." The arrival of dessert, 2 generous slices of apple pie, interrupted the moment. As they ate, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Grace felt the weight of Gabriel's words throughout the remainder of the evening. Later, as he helped her into his wagon for the journey home, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Grace found herself wondering, for the first time in years, what it might be like to be kissed by a man who looked at her the way Gabriel Reed did, as if her damaged body was merely an inconvenience to be overcome, not a fundamental flaw that defined her worth. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. The incident at the hotel became the talk of Silver Creek. Various versions circulated, most painting Gabriel as a gallant defender and Grace as either a pitiable invalid or a calculating woman who'd somehow ensnared the territory's most eligible bachelor. Grace withdrew from public view in the aftermath, refusing Gabriel's invitations to town and limiting their interactions to visits at the homestead under Thomas and Abigail's watchful eyes. "You're being ridiculous," Abigail chided one afternoon as Grace declined yet another invitation from Gabriel. "The man fought for your honor. Most women would be flattered." "I am flattered," Grace admitted, "but also realistic. Gabriel is new here. He doesn't understand what he's inviting by associating so openly with me. Perhaps he understands perfectly well and simply doesn't care," Abigail suggested. Grace shook her head. "He'll care when it affects his business. When ranchers refuse to sell to him or banks hesitate to extend credit because he's tied himself to a cripple." "Don't use that word," Abigail snapped. "You're injured, not worthless." "In this territory, they're often considered the same thing," Grace replied bitterly. Despite her resistance, Gabriel persisted. When she wouldn't accompany him to town, he brought town to her new books, exotic treats from the general store, news from beyond Silver Creek's borders. When she claimed fatigue to avoid long conversations, he sat quietly on the porch, whittling or reading, content just to be near her. His patience wore down her defenses. Gradually, Grace found herself looking forward to his visits again, planning what she would wear, how she would arrange her hair. She began to imagine, against her better judgment, what a future with Gabriel might look like. One crisp October afternoon, Gabriel arrived with his architect's drawings as promised. Thomas and Abigail conveniently remembered errands in town, leaving Grace and Gabriel alone with the plans spread across the dining table. "The main floor is designed to be accessible without stairs," Gabriel explained, pointing to the detailed floor plan. "Wide doorways, smooth thresholds. The architect thought I was eccentric, but he followed my instructions." Grace studied the drawings, recognizing the considerations for someone with limited mobility. "Gabriel, these accommodations. They're for me, aren't they?" Gabriel met her gaze directly. "Yes. You designed your home for a woman who hasn't agreed to live in it," Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I designed it for hope," Gabriel corrected. "For possibility." Grace turned away, overwhelmed. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple," Gabriel insisted, moving to stand before her. "I love you, Grace. I have almost from the moment I saw you." The declaration hung in the air between them. Grace had suspected, had even hoped, but hearing the words aloud made them real in a way her dreams had not been. "Love isn't enough," she said, her voice breaking. "Not for someone like me." "What would be enough, then?" Gabriel asked. "Tell me what you're afraid of, truly." Grace looked up at him, this man who had brought light back into her darkened world. "I'm afraid of being a burden, of watching you grow to resent me because I can't be the wife a man like you deserves." I can't ride alongside you to check your herds. I can't dance with you at socials. I can't even promise I could give you children. The doctors weren't certain what damage the bullet did inside me. Gabriel knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. Grace, listen to me. I grew up with nothing, no name, no family claiming me, no expectations beyond a life of servitude. Everything I have, I built myself, including my definition of what matters in this world. He squeezed her hands gently. What matters to me is a companion who challenges my mind, who makes me laugh, who sees me clearly and loves me anyway. You are that companion. The rest, riding, dancing, even children, those are details, not essentials. Tears welled in Grace's eyes. You say that now, but years from now, I'll still be the man who chose you, Gabriel interrupted. With my eyes wide open and my heart fully committed. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I wasn't planning to do this today, but I've learned life rarely follows our careful plans. Opening the box, he revealed a sapphire ring surrounded by small diamonds. This was my mother's, the only thing of value she possessed. She made me promise to give it only to a woman who made me feel like I belonged somewhere. Gabriel held the ring up to catch the afternoon light. You make me feel that way, Grace, like I've finally found my home. Grace stared at the ring, its blue depths reminding her of summer skies and endless possibilities. Gabriel, before you answer, he said, know this, I understand your fears. I know there will be challenges. I know people will talk. But I also know that everyone breaks in this life, Grace. Some in body, some in spirit, some in ways no one else can see. What matters isn't the breaking, it's how we mend ourselves afterward. He took a deep breath. They call you too broken to marry, but I say everyone breaks. I still want you. I will always want you, exactly as you are. Grace reached out, her fingers tracing his face, the strong jaw, the laugh lines around his eyes, the small scar near his temple from some long ago injury. This face that had become more dear to her than she'd believed possible. Ask me, she whispered. Gabriel's smile illuminated his entire being. Grace Winters, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, facing whatever comes together? For a moment, Grace saw her future unfold before her, not the lonely existence she'd resigned herself to, but one filled with purpose, companionship, and love. A future with challenges, certainly, but also with the steadfast support of the man before her. Yes, she said, her voice strengthening with each word. Yes, Gabriel Reed, I will marry you. Gabriel slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to his feet, pulling her gently upright with him. His arms encircled her waist, supporting her without making her feel helpless. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his mouth to hers. Their first kiss was tentative, a question and answer exchanged without words. Their second was a promise, sealed with increasing passion. When they finally parted, both breathless, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. I should warn you, he murmured. I'm a stubborn man. When I commit to something or someone, it's absolute. Grace laughed softly. I believe I've noticed that trait, Mr. Reed. Good, Gabriel replied, stealing another quick kiss. Because I'm committed to making you happy, Grace, for as long as we both shall live. As the afternoon sunlight bathed them in gold, Grace allowed herself to believe in the future. Gabriel offered not a life without limitations, but one where those limitations didn't define her worth or her capacity for joy. News of their engagement spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. Reactions were predictably mixed. Some, like Thomas and Abigail, were unreservedly delighted. Others expressed concerns, usually framed as concern for Gabriel rather than congratulations for Grace. Are you certain you've considered all aspects of such a union, Mrs. Henderson asked Gabriel after church the following Sunday, her voice carrying just enough for Grace to overhear from her seat in the pew. "I've considered everything that matters," Gabriel replied pleasantly but firmly. "Grace will make an exceptional wife and mistress of Rocking G." Mrs. Henderson's thin lips pursed. "Well, I'm sure you know your own mind. Though one does wonder about the practical aspects of married life with someone so limited." Before Gabriel could respond, Grace maneuvered herself to his side, leaning on her crutch but holding her head high. "Mrs. Henderson, how kind of you to take an interest in our future happiness. Perhaps you'd like to join us for dinner next week? I'd be delighted to demonstrate just how capably I manage a household despite my limitations." Mrs. Henderson flushed crimson. Well, that is wonderful," Grace continued smoothly. "Thursday at 6? Gabriel's new foreman and his wife will be joining us as well. I believe you know the Johnsons." "Yes, of course," Mrs. Henderson stammered. "Thursday would be lovely." As the flustered woman hurried away, Gabriel grinned down at Grace. "That was masterfully done, my dear." Grace felt a surge of confidence she hadn't experienced in years. "I may be damaged in body, Gabriel, but there's nothing wrong with my mind or my spine." "Nothing damaged about you at all," Gabriel corrected, offering his arm. "Just differently abled than most, and far more formidable." The weeks leading to their December wedding were filled with preparations. Gabriel's house, their future home, neared completion on the hill overlooking the valley. True to his word, every detail considered Grace's mobility, from the smooth floors to the specially designed kitchen that would allow her to cook while seated if necessary. Despite the accommodations, Grace was determined to rely on them as little as possible. She began a regimen of exercises recommended by a Dr. Gabriel had consulted in Denver, strengthening her good leg and the muscles supporting her injured one. "The doctor says you'll never regain full function," Gabriel explained gently after returning from the consultation. "But with proper support and exercise, you might gain more mobility and endurance." Grace embraced the challenge with characteristic determination. By their wedding day, she could stand without her crutch for nearly 10 minutes, long enough to speak her vows while facing Gabriel directly, supported only by his hands holding hers. The ceremony, held in Silver Creek's small church, was attended by nearly everyone in the county. Whether they came to support the couple or merely to satisfy their curiosity about the unlikely match, Grace couldn't say. She found, somewhat to her surprise, that she didn't particularly care. All that mattered was Gabriel's face as she made her way down the aisle on Thomas's arm, his eyes shining with love and pride. All that mattered was the gentle pressure of his hands as he helped her stand before the minister, the warmth in his voice as he promised to cherish her in sickness and health, for better or worse. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Gabriel's kiss was tender but unmistakably possessive, claiming Grace before all of Silver Creek as his chosen partner. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Gabriel Reed, Grace saw a mixture of expressions: joy from their friends, discomfort from some, and calculating reassessment from others who had dismissed her as unmarriageable. The reception at the hotel was more elaborate than Silver Creek typically witnessed. Gabriel had spared no expense, importing champagne from San Francisco and hiring a small orchestra from Santa Fe. When it came time for the traditional first dance, a murmur ran through the crowd: how would the couple manage this custom with Grace's disability? Gabriel silenced the whispers by sweeping Grace into his arms, carrying her effortlessly to the center of the dance floor. There, he set her gently on her feet, one arm firmly around her waist to support her weight, the other holding her hand in the traditional waltz position. "Follow my lead," he whispered. "I won't let you fall." And she didn't. They moved together in a modified waltz, Gabriel bearing most of her weight, Grace using her good leg to create the illusion of dancing. It wasn't conventional, but it was beautiful, a testament to adaptation and determination that left many guests blinking back unexpected tears. Later that night, in the privacy of the hotel's finest suite, Gabriel carried Grace across the threshold as tradition demanded. Setting her carefully on the edge of the bed, he knelt to remove her shoes. "I've dreamed of this moment," he confessed, his voice husky with emotion. "Of being alone with you, of calling you my wife." Grace trembled slightly, nervous despite herself. "I've dreamed of it too, though I feared it might never happen." Gabriel moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. "Are you afraid now?" "A little," she admitted. "I've never, and with my leg." "We have all night," Gabriel assured her. "All our lives, in fact. There's no hurry." With infinite tenderness, he helped her undress, his eyes darkening with desire as her body was revealed to him piece by piece. Where Grace expected to feel shame at the scars marking her damaged hip and thigh, she instead found acceptance in Gabriel's gaze and touch. "You're beautiful," he whispered, tracing the path of the bullet that had altered her life. "Every inch of you tells the story of your courage." That night, Gabriel showed Grace that physical love could transcend limitations, that pleasure didn't require perfect bodies, but rather perfect understanding between partners. In his arms, she felt not broken but whole, a woman desired, cherished, and adored. As they lay together afterward, Grace's head resting on Gabriel's chest, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the depths of despair after her injury to the heights of joy in her husband's embrace, the path had been neither straight nor easy. "What are you thinking?" Gabriel asked, his fingers gently combing through her hair. "That I never expected to be this happy again," Grace answered honestly. "That I'm still afraid sometimes that it can't last." Gabriel tightened his arms around her. "It will last. I promise you that." "How can you be so certain?" Grace asked. "Because happiness isn't something that happens to us, Grace. It's something we build together, day by day, choice by choice." Grace raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes. "When did you become so wise, Gabriel Reed?" He smiled, reaching up to trace the curve of her cheek. "The day I met you and recognized what truly matters in this life." As she settled back against him, Grace reflected that perhaps they were both broken in their own ways, Gabriel by a childhood of rejection, she by a bullet's random path. Yet together, they had created something whole and beautiful, a love that didn't deny life's hardships but transcended them. The following spring found Grace presiding over her new home with growing confidence. The house Gabriel had built for them stood proudly on the hillside, its wide veranda offering views across the valley to the mountains beyond. Inside, every room reflected both Gabriel's prosperity and his consideration for Grace's needs, without making those accommodations obvious to casual visitors. Grace's embroidery business flourished, with orders arriving regularly from Denver, Santa Fe, and even as far as San Francisco. Gabriel had converted one of the front rooms into a studio for her, with large windows providing abundant natural light and custom-built storage for her materials. Life as a rancher's wife brought challenges, as Grace had anticipated, but she met them with characteristic determination. She couldn't ride the range with Gabriel, but she managed the household accounts with precision, entertained important business associates with grace, and created a home that became known throughout the territory for its warmth and hospitality. On days when her leg pained her too much for walking, she used the wheelchair Gabriel had designed for her, elegant and comfortable, looking more like a piece of fine furniture than a medical device. On better days, she moved through the house with a specially crafted walking stick, its handle inlaid with mother-of-pearl, a gift from Gabriel on their 1-month anniversary. Their physical relationship deepened with time and trust, each discovering the other's desires and developing a language of love unique to them. Grace found that her body, which she had once viewed as a prison, could be a source of profound pleasure and connection when shared with someone who saw her wholeness rather than her limitations. Summer brought news that altered their lives once more. After weeks of unexplained fatigue and morning illness, Grace consulted the doctor, who confirmed what she had begun to suspect: she was expecting a child. "The pregnancy appears healthy," the doctor assured her. "Though your condition will require special monitoring, I recommend minimal exertion and perhaps bed rest in the later months." Grace waited anxiously for Gabriel to return from a cattle drive, uncertain how he would receive the news. They had discussed children only theoretically, both aware of the potential complications Grace's injury might create. When Gabriel rode into the yard that evening, dusty and weary from days on the trail, Grace met him on the veranda, her expression giving away her news before she could speak it. "Grace," Gabriel questioned, dismounting quickly. "What is it?" "We're going to have a baby," she said, her voice wavering between joy and apprehension. "In January." For a moment, Gabriel stood frozen, his expression unreadable. Then, with a whoop that startled the ranch hands nearby, he bounded up the steps and gathered Grace into his arms, lifting her feet clear off the porch. "A baby?" he repeated, his face alight with wonder. "Our baby." "You're pleased, then?" Grace asked, though his reaction left little doubt. "Pleased doesn't begin to describe it," Gabriel said, setting her gently back on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "I'm elated, overjoyed, terrified." "Terrified," Grace echoed. Gabriel's expression sobered slightly. "Only about your health, my love. The doctor says everything looks good." Grace assured him, "I'll need to be careful, especially toward the end, but there's no reason to expect complications." Gabriel pressed his forehead to hers. "I couldn't bear to lose you, Grace. Not now, not ever." "You won't," she promised. "We're stronger than that, remember? Both of us." The months of Grace's pregnancy passed with Gabriel hovering attentively, hiring additional household help and insisting Grace rest frequently. She complied with his protective measures more often than not, recognizing the love behind his concern, though occasionally she had to remind him that pregnancy was not an illness and she was not made of porcelain. As her body changed, accommodating the growing life within, Grace discovered new limitations but also new strengths. Her balance, always precarious with her damaged leg, became more challenging as her center of gravity shifted. Yet she found an unexpected grace in the slower-paced pregnancy enforced upon her, a deeper appreciation for quiet moments and small pleasures. The baby's movements, when they began, fascinated both parents. Gabriel would spend evenings with his hand pressed to Grace's rounded belly, his expression one of perpetual amazement as their child kicked and rolled. "He's strong," Gabriel observed one night as a particularly vigorous movement visibly rippled across Grace's abdomen. Grace questioned with a smile. "You're certain it's a son?" Gabriel shrugged. "Son or daughter, it makes no difference to me. Though I confess I sometimes imagine a little girl with your eyes and spirit." "And your stubbornness?" Grace added, covering his hand with hers. "Heaven help us if that's the case," Gabriel laughed. "One stubborn Reed in the family is quite enough." "Two," Grace corrected. "I believe I've demonstrated ample stubbornness of my own." Gabriel leaned in to kiss her softly. "Indeed you have, Mrs. Reed. It's one of the many things I love about you." Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow by early December. As Grace's January due date approached, Gabriel arranged for the doctor to stay in a guest room at the ranch, unwilling to risk being unable to fetch medical help when labor began. The precaution proved wise. On Christmas Eve, 3 weeks before her expected time, Grace felt the first contractions while decorating the tree Gabriel had cut and brought into their parlor. "Gabriel," she called, her voice steady despite the unexpected pain. "I think it's time." What followed was a long night of labor, with Gabriel refusing to leave Grace's side despite the doctor's suggestions that the birthing room was no place for a husband. He supported her through each contraction, wiped her brow, and whispered encouragement when her strength seemed to flag. "You can do this," he repeated throughout the night. "You're the strongest person I know, Grace Reed." As dawn broke on Christmas morning, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that belied her early arrival and small size. The doctor pronounced her healthy despite her prematurity, marveling at the infant's strong grip and alert eyes. "She's perfect," Gabriel whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he held his daughter for the first time. "Grace, she's absolutely perfect." Grace, exhausted but radiant, reached out to touch the dark hair that already showed signs of curling like her father's. "Hope," she said softly. "Her name is Hope." Gabriel's eyes met hers, understanding the significance immediately. "Hope Reed," he repeated, testing the name. "It's perfect for her." As Gabriel placed their daughter in Grace's arms, she felt a circle completing from the brokenness that had once defined her existence to this moment of absolute wholeness, holding the physical manifestation of the love she and Gabriel had built together. "Merry Christmas, my love," Gabriel said, perching carefully on the edge of the bed beside his wife and daughter. "I believe this is the finest gift we could have received." "Better than that embroidery frame you've been hiding in your study?" Grace teased, her eyes twinkling despite her exhaustion. Gabriel laughed. "You weren't supposed to know about that." "There's very little that happens in this house without my knowledge, Mr. Reed," Grace informed him primly. "A fact you would do well to remember." Gabriel leaned in to kiss first Grace's forehead, then their daughter's. "I shall endeavor to keep no secrets from either of my ladies," he promised solemnly. As the Christmas sun rose higher, bathing the room in golden light, the Reed family shared their first moments together. A man once denied family, a woman once denied future, and the child who represented both their healing and their hope. 5 years later, Grace stood on the veranda of their home, watching as Gabriel led their daughter Hope on her pony across the ranch yard. At 5 years old, Hope was already showing signs of the determination that characterized both her parents, insisting on riding like Papa, despite her mother's initial concerns. "Easy now," Gabriel called as Hope urged her pony into a trot. "Remember what I taught you about the reins." Hope adjusted her small hands obediently, her face a study in concentration beneath the wide brim of her hat, a miniature version of her father's. Grace smiled, one hand resting on her walking stick, the other absently caressing the slight swell of her abdomen where their second child grew. This pregnancy, now in its 4th month, had been planned with careful consultation with doctors in Denver. Though her first birth had gone well, Grace was taking no chances with this unexpected blessing. The ranch had prospered under Gabriel's management, expanding to become one of the largest operations in the territory. Grace's embroidery continued to be in demand, though she now limited her commissions to special pieces that particularly interested her, preferring to devote most of her time to her family and the charitable foundation she and Gabriel had established. The Grace Reed Foundation for Children's Education had begun as a small project to provide books and supplies to rural schools throughout the territory. It had grown to include scholarships for promising students and support for a teacher's college in Santa Fe. The work gave Grace profound satisfaction, particularly when she received letters from young women who might otherwise have been denied education due to circumstances or physical limitations. "Mama, look," Hope called, executing a perfect circle on her pony. "I did it just like Papa showed me." "Beautifully done, darling," Grace called back, her heart swelling with pride. Gabriel guided his horse alongside Hope's pony, beaming with paternal pride. As they completed their riding lesson, He lifted Hope from her saddle and set her on his shoulders for the walk back to the house. "Your daughter," he announced as they climbed the veranda steps, "is a natural horsewoman. She'll be outpacing me by next summer." Hope giggled from her perch. "Papa says I can help with the spring roundup when I'm 6, she informed Grace importantly. "Does he indeed?" Grace arched an eyebrow at her husband, who had the grace to look slightly abashed. "As an observer only," Gabriel clarified hastily. "From a very safe distance." Grace shook her head, but her smile betrayed her lack of genuine disapproval. Gabriel had proven himself an exceptional father, protective without being stifling, encouraging Hope's spirit of adventure while ensuring her safety. "Go wash up for lunch, Hope," Grace instructed. "Aunt Abigail and Uncle Thomas will be here soon with your cousins." As Hope scampered inside, Gabriel drew Grace into his arms. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, his hand moving to rest protectively over hers on her stomach. "Wonderful," Grace assured him. "Dr. Michaels says everything is progressing perfectly." Gabriel's relief was evident in the relaxation of his shoulders. Despite the successful birth of Hope and Grace's generally good health, he never took the well-being of his family for granted. "I was thinking," he said as they moved inside together, "about expanding the foundation's work." "Oh!" Grace settled into her favorite chair by the window, where she could watch the mountains while she worked on correspondence or embroidery. Gabriel nodded, taking the seat opposite her. "I met a veteran in town yesterday, lost his arm at Gettysburg. He mentioned how difficult it was to find employment, even though he's still capable of many types of work. You're thinking of expanding our mission to include adults with disabilities," Grace surmised, not needing him to elaborate further. After years together, they often followed the same trains of thought. "Exactly," Gabriel confirmed. "Perhaps a training program or grants for businesses willing to hire disabled workers." Grace considered the idea, already envisioning how it might be structured. "We could start with veterans, then expand to include others. There's that vacant building near the rail depot that might serve as a training center." Gabriel smiled, watching his wife's mind work. "I knew you'd see the possibilities immediately." "It's a wonderful idea," Grace agreed. "We'll discuss it with the foundation board next week." She paused, her expression softening. "You're a good man, Gabriel Reed." "I'm a fortunate man," he corrected, "with a remarkable wife who continues to amaze me daily." Grace felt a familiar warmth spread through her at his words. Even after years of marriage, Gabriel's admiration and desire remained constant, a bedrock upon which their life together was built. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Thomas and Abigail with their 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, all close in age to Hope. The cousins' excited voices filled the house as they greeted each other and raced off to play. "How are you feeling, Gracie?" Abigail asked, embracing her sister-in-law carefully. "Perfectly well," Grace assured her. "This pregnancy seems even easier than the first." Thomas clapped Gabriel on the shoulder. "Ready for another midnight feeding schedule, Reed?" Gabriel laughed. "More ready than I was the first time, certainly. At least now I know what to expect." As the men moved to Gabriel's study to discuss business, Abigail helped Grace oversee the final preparations for lunch. "I saw Mrs. Henderson in town yesterday," Abigail mentioned casually. "She asked after you." Grace smiled, remembering the woman's initial disapproval of her marriage. "And what did you tell her?" "That you were flourishing, of course," Abigail replied with a grin. "That the Reed Ranch is the envy of the territory, and that your foundation work is being recognized as far away as Washington." "You exaggerate," Grace chided gently. "Only slightly," Abigail insisted. "You know, she actually admitted she was wrong about you and Gabriel. Said she'd never seen a more well-matched couple." Grace raised her eyebrows in surprise. Mrs. Henderson admitted she was wrong? Perhaps miracles do happen. Both women laughed, their relationship having deepened into true sisterhood over the years. Lunch was a lively affair, with the children chattering about their Christmas wishes and the adults discussing plans for the holiday gathering they hosted annually at the ranch. This year would mark their 5th Christmas in the house Gabriel had built for them, a milestone that felt significant to Grace. After the meal, while the others retired to the parlor for coffee, Grace slipped away to her studio. The afternoon light was perfect for working on her current project, a christening gown for the new baby, incorporating lace from her wedding dress and silk threads Gabriel had brought from his last trip to San Francisco. As she settled at her work table, Grace reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the desperate young woman who believed her life effectively ended with a bullet's impact to the wife, mother, and community leader, she had become the transformation seemed almost miraculous when viewed in retrospect. Yet it hadn't been a miracle, she knew. It had been a series of choices, Gabriel's choice to see beyond her injury to the woman beneath, her choice to risk her heart despite her fears, their joint choice to build a life that accommodated her limitations without being defined by them. Grace's fingers moved deftly across the delicate fabric, each stitch a testament to the patience she had learned through adversity, the precision that came from focusing on what she could control rather than lamenting what she could not. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. Gabriel stood in the doorway, watching her with the same admiration he'd shown since their first meeting. "Everyone's asking for you," he said. "The children want to play charades, and apparently I'm a terrible partner." Grace set aside her work. "I'll be right there." As she rose, Gabriel crossed the room to offer his arm, not because she needed it on good days like today. Her walking stick was sufficient, but because he enjoyed the closeness. "I was just thinking," Grace said as they walked together toward the sounds of laughter from the parlor, "about what you said to me when you proposed, about everyone being broken in some way." Gabriel nodded. "I still believe that." "As do I," Grace agreed. "But I've been thinking that perhaps it's not just that everyone breaks. It's that the breaking is what allows us to become more than we were if we let it." Gabriel considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Like your embroidery needle, creating beauty by piercing the fabric." "Exactly," Grace said, pleased by his understanding. "Without the breaking of the fabric's surface, of our expectations, of our predetermined paths, there would be no opportunity for new patterns to emerge." They paused at the parlor entrance, observing their family and friends for a moment before joining them. Hope sat on Thomas's lap, directing the charades game with comical authority. Abigail was attempting to act out what appeared to be a horse, to the hilarious confusion of her children. "I wouldn't change a moment of our path," Gabriel said quietly. "Not the difficulties, not the challenges. They led us here, to this life we've built together." Grace leaned into his solid presence, drawing strength from it as she had countless times over the years. "Nor would I," she agreed, "though I might have appreciated some warning about just how stubborn you would be about certain matters." Gabriel's laugh was low and warm against her ear. Such as insisting on carrying me up the stairs when I'm perfectly capable of managing them myself," Grace replied primly. "Or replacing my walking sticks so frequently that I have a collection to match every dress I own." "Guilty as charged," Gabriel admitted without a hint of repentance. "Though you'll notice I've learned not to interfere when you insist on managing the foundation accounts personally, or when you overrule my suggestions about Hope's education." "A wise man knows which battles to concede," Grace observed sagely. "And which are worth fighting," Gabriel added, his voice turning serious. "You were worth fighting for, Grace Reed. Every doubt, every obstacle, every disapproving glance from people who couldn't see what I saw in you from the beginning." Grace turned to face him fully, reaching up to touch his face still handsome, though now bearing the lines of maturity and responsibility. And what was that? What did you see that others missed? Gabriel's answer was immediate and certain. A woman whose strength was forged in fire, not diminished by it. A spirit that refused to be defined by circumstance. A heart capable of love so deep and true that it could transform not just one life, but many. Before Grace could respond, Hope's voice called from the parlor. "Mama, Papa, you're missing all the fun." "Coming, sweetheart?" Grace called back, her eyes still holding Gabriel's. In that gaze was the silent communication of a couple whose bond had been tested by hardship and strengthened by shared purpose, a language developed over years of partnership that transcended words. As they joined their family, Grace's steps were steady, supported by Gabriel's arm and her own hard-won confidence. The bullet that had once threatened to limit her life had instead become merely one chapter in a much larger story, a story of resilience, adaptation, and love that refused to be constrained by conventional expectations. They had proven, day by day and year by year, that brokenness was not an ending but a beginning. That healing came not from erasing scars but from incorporating them into a new and more complex pattern. That love, when genuine, saw not what was lost but what remained and what could yet be built from those remaining pieces. In the laughter of their daughter, the movement of new life within Grace's body, and the warmth of Gabriel's hand clasping hers, lay the evidence of that truth, a legacy more meaningful than any physical limitation could diminish. As Hope climbed into her lap and Gabriel's arms settled around her shoulders, Grace knew with absolute certainty that some things, once broken, could be remade into something far more beautiful than their original form, like shattered glass reassembled into a mosaic that caught and reflected light in ways a smooth surface never could. In that knowledge was not just contentment but triumph, the quiet, enduring triumph of a love that had looked at brokenness and seen not defeat but possibility. The end.